The axiom of the lumen was simple: all that exists can be known, and all that is known must be preserved. They were not conquerors or explorers in the crude sense that other races define the terms. They were the galaxy's immortal memory. A civilization of archivists whose technology was built not to shatter worlds, but to perfectly record them. Their ships, vessels of spun light and captured gravity, moved through the void not as intruders, but as silent, reverent observers. The stellograph, under the guidance of senior archivist Lyra, was tasked with charting the Ghost Limb Arm, a region of space littered with the graves of forgotten empires. It was a somber, sacred duty, and for Kalen, a junior archivist on his first deep field survey, it was the culmination of his life's purpose. He watched the star charts flicker across the observation dome, each point of light a story waiting to be read, its history a thread to be woven into the grand, infinite tapestry of the Lumen archives. The anomaly, when it appeared, was not a flare of energy or a gravitational disturbance. It was the opposite. It was a patch of utter nullity, a hole in the fabric of space-time's data stream. A star system designated Xylos, once home to a species known as the Helians, was broadcasting a perfect, structured silence. It did not merely fail to emit signals, it actively consumed them, drawing in the ambient radiation and cosmic background noise and leaving a void, a wound in the universe's narrative. Lyra, her form a cascade of pale, shimmering light, regarded the void on the main screen with an unease that was rare for her kind. Old records list the Helian civilization as a Category 9 extinction event, she noted, her voice a series of soft, resonant chimes. A stellar flare scoured their system 3 millennia ago. The world should be a dead, near radioactive cinder. It should be screaming its decay into the void, not hushing it. Kalen, his own luminous form tighter and brighter with youthful eagerness, leaned closer to his console. Perhaps it is a natural phenomenon we have not yet catalogued, a localized chronosynclastic infundibulum. He brought up the ancient survey data. The Helians had been a species of artists and philosophers, known for their delicate crystal architecture and their poetry, which sought to find the universe's underlying mathematical beauty. They were thinkers, not fighters, a candle flame of a civilization that had been snuffed out by a careless cosmic wind. They were not a people who could have conceived of, let alone engineered, a silence so profound it could blind the sensors of a lumen ship. The decision was made by the expedition lead, a remote consensus from the core worlds, to dispatch a weaver. These probes were the pinnacle of lumen observational technology, drones of pure information that could pass through a planet's atmosphere and catalog every molecule without disturbing a single grain of dust. The weaver assigned to Xylos descended into the rust-colored clouds, its mission to understand the source of the silence. It was gone for 17 standard hours. When it re-emerged, it was fundamentally wrong. Its data streams, usually a flowing river of orderly information, were a torrent of corrupted code. But it wasn't random noise or decay. It was a pattern, an intricate, repeating algorithm that seemed to be an inverse of the lumen's own foundational language. It was a structured anti-thought, a logic built from negation, and embedded within this perfect paradox, transmitted on a single, clean frequency, was an image, a perfect, elegant spiral, rendered in what appeared to be polished, interlocking pieces of bone. It spun slowly, a sigil of defiance against the very concept of being known. Lyra ordered the probe quarantined, her light flickering with alarm. "This is not a natural phenomenon," she chimed, her tone losing its melodic quality. "It is a response. The planet is aware of us. It is speaking to us in the only language it knows, the mutilation of our own." But the expedition lead, intrigued by this unprecedented intellectual puzzle, saw it differently. An unknown form of intelligent communication from a supposedly dead world was a discovery of unparalleled significance. The risk was deemed acceptable. A small survey team would make a discreet landing. Kalen, his mind alight with the thrill of discovery, was chosen to go. He would be the first to set foot on a world that had rewritten the laws of information. Their lander, the quiet Quill, descended not with fire and thunder, but by folding the space around it, arriving in a silent ripple of displaced air. They materialized in a vast, open valley that the old charts marked as the Helians' Grand Conclave, a place of learning and debate. The air was thin and carried a metallic tang. An unnatural stillness hung over everything, a silence so absolute it felt like a pressure against the ears. The graceful crystalline spires of the Helian Academy still stood, but they were scarred and altered. Encircling the delicate towers were brutalist scaffolds of a dark, non-reflective metal, forged into sharp, aggressive angles. The ethereal, sweeping lines of the original architecture had been caged, imprisoned within a new, grim philosophy written in iron and stone. It was as if a predator had built its nest in the bones of a songbird. Kalen's environmental suit kept the thin atmosphere at bay, but it couldn't filter out the profound sense of wrongness. There were no insects, no birds, no wind rustling through the petrified groves of what were once living crystal trees. His multi-spectrum visor, designed to see everything from heat signatures to psychic resonance, showed him only shades of gray and black, so the world was a photograph with the color and life bled out of it. The team moved forward, their soft footfalls the only sound in the dead valley. They were three Kalen, the data specialist, a xenobotanist named Fail, tasked with analyzing the dead flora, and Orin, their security, a lumen whose form was denser, trained to manipulate hard light fields for defense. Orin's unease was palpable, his light shifting in agitated patterns. "I can't get a clear reading," he chimed, his voice tight. "My perimeter sensors are blank. It's like trying to see in a sealed room with no light." It was Kalen who saw it first. Standing in the center of what looked like a ruined amphitheater was a figure. It was not a heat source, nor did it register on life sign scanners. On his visor, it was a hole, a humanoid-shaped patch of absolute nothing that absorbed every sensor wave he directed at it. A null figure. "Hold," Orin commanded, raising a hand that glowed with nascent defensive energy. The team stopped, the silence of the valley seeming to deepen around them, focusing on the impossible silhouette. They approached slowly, their academic curiosity warring with a primal instinct to flee. As they drew closer, the void began to resolve into a physical form. It was tall and slender, encased head to toe in interlocking plates of a matte black material that seemed to drink the light. The suit was seamless, its design both alien and deeply unsettling in its stark functionality. The helmet was a smooth, ovoid shape with no visor, no optics, no features of any kind. It was a being defined by its complete refusal to be seen. It stood perfectly still, its posture one of utter patience. as if it had been waiting in that exact spot for millennia. Kalen, feeling the weight of his mission, stepped forward. He activated the standard first contact protocol, a gesture of intellectual peace. From his wrist projector, he beamed a soft, blue sequence of light, the prime numbers, followed by the universal constants of atomic decay. A message that said, "We are beings of logic. We understand the universe as you do. We mean no harm." The featureless helmet tilted, a gesture that could have been curiosity or perhaps appraisal. The figure raised one gloved hand, palm open. It did not fire a weapon or project energy. Instead, a wave of pure negation rolled out from it. It had no sound, no physical force, but Kalen felt it in his mind. A psychic blow that was the conceptual opposite of existence. His visor went black. The team's internal comms filled with a soundless static. Their suit lights died. For a full 10 seconds, they were blind, deaf, and utterly alone in the crushing silence of Xylos. When their systems rebooted with a panicked chime, the null figure was gone. Kalen's heart, a core of swirling energy within his luminous form, pulsed erratically. Orin was already scanning the area, his hard light shield now fully formed and shimmering around their small group. Fail was crouched low to the ground, his light dim with fear. On the dusty floor of the amphitheater, precisely where the being had stood, was a new marking. It was another spiral, identical to the one from the Weaver's transmission, drawn in the dust with a geometric perfection that no hand could have achieved. Back on the stellograph, orbiting in the deceptive safety of the void, Lyra saw the team's biometrics and sensor data flatline, then return. "Kalen, report what was that?" Her voice, transmitted across the ship's private channel, was sharp with command. Kalen, his own voice trembling as he translated it into the chimes of their language, described the encounter. "It weaponized absence. Lyra, it did not attack us with something. It attacked us with nothing. It controls the flow of information on a fundamental level." As he spoke, he was analyzing the brief flicker of data his suit had captured in the microsecond before the blackout. The material of the null figure's armor wasn't just non-reflective, it was actively shunting all incoming energy and data into a pocket dimension, a sliver of null space. The technology was so far beyond Lumen understanding as to be functionally magic. These were not the descendants of the poetic Helians. The Helians were gone. Whatever this was, it had been born from their ashes, forged in the crucible of that ancient stellar fire and millennia of absolute isolation. They hadn't just survived, they had metastasized. They hadn't built a civilization, they had perfected a weapon. And Xylos was not their home. It was their killing jar. Orin's voice cut through his thoughts, low and urgent. Movement. He pointed toward the crumbling spires of the academy, all around them from the dark, angular archways of the new structures and the shattered crystal windows of the old. More figures were emerging, dozens of them. They moved with a silent, fluid grace, their featureless black helmets all turning in unison to face the small group of terrified scholars. They didn't run or charge. They simply appeared, silent sentinels of the void, forming a loose, inescapable circle. Kalen looked back the way they had come, the entrance to the valley. Their only path back to the quiet quill was no longer open. A shimmering curtain of perfect, impenetrable darkness had risen from the ground. a wall of absolute nothingness that pulsed with the same silent energy as the null figure's attack. They were sealed in. A low, resonant hum began to fill the air, a sound that their suits could not analyze but that Kalen felt vibrating deep inside his being. It was the sound of the trap, which had been waiting for 3,000 years, finally closing. The hunt had begun, and the archivists, for the first time in their long and storied history, were about to be erased from the record. Orin reacted with the speed of pure instinct, a concept almost alien to the Lumen's culture of deliberate thought. A dome of hard, scintillating light erupted around the three of them, a perfect hemisphere that cast flickering, prismatic patterns on the dead. Gray dust. It was their last bastion of known physics in a world that was actively unwriting the rules. Outside the shield, the circle of null figures tightened, their movements economical and synchronized, like a shoal of sharks sensing blood in the water. They did not rush the barrier, they simply watched it, their featureless helmets seeming to absorb the very light that Orin's shield projected. The low, resonant hum grew louder, changing in pitch and texture until it was no longer just a sound, but a physical vibration that resonated in the crystalline matrices of their bodies. Kalen's mind, a machine built for analysis, was failing. He ran diagnostic after diagnostic on the wall of nothingness that blocked their retreat, but his instruments returned only paradoxes. It had no mass, no energy, no temperature. Yet it was an absolute barrier. It wasn't a wall of force. It was a localized secession from reality itself, a controlled tear in the fabric of existence. He tried to send a compressed data burst to the stellograph, a desperate plea for retrieval, but the signal didn't bounce back or get jammed. It simply vanished the moment it left his transmitter, consumed by the planet's suffocating silence. "They're not just blocking us," Kalen chimed, his voice tight with a dawning horror. "They're editing us out of the local universe." Fail. The xenobotanist was losing his composure. His luminous form flickered erratically, the light of his being pulsing in a rhythm of pure terror. "What are they? What do they want?" he cried, his gaze darting from one silent black figure to the next. They were a question with no possible answer, an equation that resolved only to zero. The attack, when it came, was not on their bodies, but on their minds. The world outside Orin's shield began to distort. The ruined Hylian spires seemed to bend and warp, their graceful crystal lines twisting into grotesque, impossible shapes. Kalen's visor, his window to the world, began to fill with ghosts. He saw phantom images of the Weaver probe floating past, its form pristine and undamaged. He saw readings indicating a breathable, nitrogen-rich atmosphere just beyond the shield. He even heard Lyra's calm, melodic voice in his comm, a perfect syntactical ghost. "Kalen, the anomaly is resolving. Stand down your defenses. It is a natural formation." He knew it was false. His core logic screamed that it was a trick, a manipulation of their sensor feeds. But the data was perfect, flawless. The null figures were not hacking their systems. They were feeding them a new reality, overwriting the old one with a more convenient fiction. Orin grunted, the light of his shield wavering. "They're pushing against it, not with force, but with suggestion. The field wants to believe it isn't there." He was fighting a war on a metaphysical front, his will against the planet's will to be empty. "We have to move," Kalen urged, forcing himself to look past the false data. to trust the primal fear that was a truer instrument than any of his sensors. They are hurting us, disorienting us. We need to break the circle. Orin scanned the perimeter, his optical sensors fighting through layers of corrupted data. He found a gap, a section of the circle where the figures were spread thinner, near the base of a massive, half-shattered crystal spire that was now caged in the dark, angular metal of the newcomers. There, he chimed. If we can reach the ruins, we might find cover. We can't fight their logic out here. With a surge of will, Orin reshaped the dome into a wedge, a prow of hard light aimed at the gap. Move now, he commanded. They ran. The moment they left the relative safety of their static position, the psychological assault intensified. The ground beneath their feet seemed to turn to liquid, the gray dust swirling into disorienting patterns. The air filled with the phantom sounds of a bustling Helian city chimes, whispers, the soft scrape of crystal on crystal, a ghost symphony designed to confuse and distract. Fail cried out, stumbling as he saw a vision of a beautiful, flowering crystal tree sprout from the dead ground directly in his path. It wasn't there, but the illusion was so perfect that his mind forced his body to react. Kalen grabbed him, pulling him along. Don't trust what you see. Trust only the path. The null figures flowed around them, not trying to intercept, but to guide. A clear path would suddenly be filled with the illusion of a deep chasm. An open archway would appear to be a solid wall of iron. They were rats in a maze whose walls could rewrite themselves at will. They reached the base of the spire, scrambling into the deep shadows where the original Helion crystal met the parasitic black metal. The door to the structure was a massive, seamless slab of the same light-absorbing material, but as they approached, it slid open with a terrifying, frictionless silence. It was not an escape, it was an invitation. It's a trap, Orin stated, the observation so obvious it was almost absurd. But the valley is a bigger one, Kalen countered, his mind racing. Inside, we might be able to disrupt their control over the environment, confine the variables. They plunged into the darkness, and the great door slid shut behind them, sealing them in a new, more intimate silence. The interior was a cathedral of desecration. The Helians had built the spire as an observatory, a place to contemplate the beauty of the cosmos. Its crystalline walls were designed to catch and refract starlight into breathtaking patterns. Now, those walls were scarred, half-sheathed in the dead black metal. Wires and conduits snaked across the delicate crystal facets like strangler vines. And everywhere, on every surface, was the spiral, etched into the metal, burned into the crystal, laid out on the floor in patterns of sordid, polished bone. Some spirals were small, delicate things made from what looked like the finger bones of birds. Others were massive, intricate mosaics crafted from the skulls and femurs of creatures Kalen could not identify. It was the symbol of their new philosophy. The universe was not a thing of beauty to be observed, but a resource to be consumed and repurposed, spiraling inward to a point of perfect, final silence. They moved deeper into the spire, down a long sloping ramp that led to the central chamber. Here, the full horror of what these beings were became clear. It was a workshop. Against one wall, pinned and dissected with surgical precision, were the remains of their Weaver probe. Its informational core had been cracked open, its elegant code unspooled and translated into the null figure's own language of negation. They hadn't just destroyed it. They had studied it, learned from it, and inverted its purpose. On other tables lay pieces of alien technology. Kalen didn't recognize the energy core of a Vaxtorian cruiser, the navigation system of a Cygnian freighter, all broken down to their fundamental principles. This was not a colony. It was an intelligence agency, a predator that hunted not for territory or resources, but for knowledge it could turn into a weapon. Then Fail screamed, a pure, sharp chime of utter mental collapse. He pointed a trembling hand toward an alcove they had not noticed. Within it, suspended in a stasis field, was a lumen. Or at least, it had been. Its luminous form was frozen mid-dissipation, its light curdled and dark. Probes and wires, made from the same black material, were embedded in its energy core, siphoning its essence, studying its biology, its consciousness. It was a specimen, an artifact from a survey team that had come before them and had been similarly consumed. This was the source of the false comms from Lyra, the ghost in their machine. They had captured a lumen and turned its mind into a weapon against its own kind. The sight shattered Fail's sanity. His logical mind, dedicated to the gentle study of life, could not process this methodical, intellectual cruelty. His light began to flare wildly, and he turned, sprinting back the way they had come. The door, he shrieked. I saw it open the sky. File, no, Kalen shouted. But it was too late. An archway at the far end of the chamber, which Kalen's struggling sensors insisted was a solid wall, shimmered and seemed to dissolve, revealing a perfect image of the Xylos Valley under a calm, starry sky. The quiet Quill sat waiting, its entry ramp lowered. It was a lie, a beautifully crafted illusion tailored to a breaking mind. Fail, sobbing with relief, ran toward it. He didn't slow as he reached the archway. Oren lunged to stop him, a hand of hard light extending, but he was a fraction of a second too late. Fail passed through the shimmering portal and was gone. There was no sound, no flash, no scream. He simply ceased to be. On Kalen's suit monitor, every piece of data associated with Fail, his biosignature, his comlink, his life sign indicator simultaneously went from green to null. Not red for deceased, just blank. An empty space where a person used to be. He had been deleted from the universe. Kalen and Oren stood in stunned silence, the loss so absolute it was incomprehensible. Fail hadn't died. He had been unwritten. The illusion of the valley vanished, and the archway was once again a solid wall of black metal etched with a bone spiral. The low, resonant hum returned, but this time it was different. It coalesced in their minds. No longer an external sound, but an internal thought. A voice that was not a voice, speaking a language of pure concept. It was cold, clear, and filled with an ancient, chilling certainty. That which is known, it thought into them, can be erased. The archive is incomplete. Your preservation is flawed. We offer the perfection of the void. We will teach you the meaning of a complete record, one that ends in nothing. Kalen looked at Oren, whose dense light seemed to have shrunk, dimmed by the sheer existential weight of their enemy's philosophy. They were not just fighting for their lives. They were fighting against the very concept of erasure, against a sentient, intelligent void that had looked upon the glorious, messy, data-rich tapestry of the universe and had decided, with perfect, cold logic, that its one and only purpose was to unweave it, Thread by thread, the lesson had begun, and they were the first pages to be torn from the book. The silent, conceptual voice receded, leaving a vacuum in its wake that was more terrifying than the message itself. It hadn't threatened them, it had stated a thesis, and Fail's non-existence was the first piece of supporting evidence. Kalen's mind, reeling from the loss, tried to find a foothold in logic. Erasure was a philosophical impossibility to the Lumen, even in death. A being left an echo, a pattern of decayed energy, a ghost in the universal data stream. But Fail had left nothing. He was a perfect blank. It was a violation of the most fundamental laws of information and conservation. What do we do? Oren's voice was a low, strained chime, the sound of a bell being struck by a lead weight. His defensive posture was gone, replaced by a weary stillness. He had been trained to guard against things that existed, to block energy, to deflect matter. How could he protect them from an enemy that wielded non-existence as a weapon? Kalen forced himself to look away from the empty space where Fail had been, forcing his analytical mind back online, one sputtering process at a time. They're studying us, he reasoned, his thoughts forming slowly, painfully. That lumen, the specimen in the stasis field, they learned its language, its psychology. They crafted an illusion specifically for Fail, a vision of escape he couldn't resist. They are learning how to unmake us, one mind at a time. The implication was chilling. They weren't just killing intruders, they were dissecting them, finding the precise intellectual and emotional levers to pry their consciousness apart. They were scholars of annihilation. A new sound broke the silence, a soft, rhythmic scraping. From the shadowy archways around the circular chamber, more null figures emerged. But these were different. They were not the silent, patient sentinels from the valley. These were carrying tools. They were thin, blade-like instruments of the same black, light-absorbing material, and long, delicate probes that seemed to shimmer with a captured, negative energy. They moved not with the grace of warriors, but with the deliberate and unhurried precision of surgeons or morticians. "They're not going to fight us," Oren whispered, his hard light field flickering back to life around them, weaker this time. "They're going to deconstruct us." The figures formed a circle, just as they had outside, but this was a sterile, clinical ring. One of them stepped forward, its featureless helmet tilting as it regarded the two lumen. It held up one of its instruments, a long, thin rod that ended in a perfectly sharp point. The conceptual voice, returned to their minds, colder and more detached than before. "You are an anomaly, a variable in the equation of silence. To understand the function, the variable must be isolated." Kalen felt a pressure in his mind, not a physical force, but an intellectual one. It was the feeling of being read. His memories, his training, his personal identity, all of it was being scanned, parsed, and cataloged by the collective consciousness of the beings in the room. He could feel them sifting through his knowledge of lumen star charting protocols, his understanding of quantum entanglement communication. They were downloading him. "Oren, they're inside my head," he cried out, his luminous form flaring with panic. The security officer responded instantly. He focused his energy, not into a broad shield, but into a tight, disruptive aura around Kalen. A wave of chaotic, unstructured hard light washed over Kalen's form, scrambling the psychic signal. It was a crude, brutal defense, like shouting static to drown out a whisper. But it worked. The mental pressure vanished. The null figure that had been focusing on him took a single step back, a gesture of surprise so subtle it was almost imperceptible. For the first time, they had encountered resistance they had not predicted. The collective hum in the chamber shifted, a subtle modulation in its frequency. The voice returned, and for the first time, there was a flicker of something that might have been curiosity, or perhaps even frustration. Logic can be shielded, an interesting defense. But you are composed of more than logic. You are also composed of light, and light can be bent. The figures raised their tools in unison. From the tips of the long, thin rods, a beam of absolute darkness shot forth. It wasn't shadow. It was anti-light. Where the beams struck Orin's shield, they did not deflect or shatter. They simply erased the light. Small, perfect holes began to appear in the shimmering dome of energy, voids where the hard light ceased to exist. Orin cried out in pain, a sharp, metallic chime. "It's not just blocking the light," he gasped, his own form dimming as he poured more and more energy into maintaining the failing shield. "It's uncreating it. It's draining my essence." The shield was a part of him, an extension of his being. The holes in it were wounds in his own soul. Kalen watched in horror as the shield began to dissolve like sugar in water, eaten away by the creeping tendrils of nothingness. They had seconds before it collapsed completely. His mind, now clear of the mental intrusion, was racing. They couldn't fight. They couldn't defend. Their only option was to introduce a variable the null figures couldn't control to break the sterile logic of their laboratory. His gaze fell upon the central workbench, where the dissected Weaver probe lay in pieces, and next to it, the power core of the Vaxtorian cruiser, a piece of technology known for its catastrophic instability when breached. It was a desperate, insane gamble, a violation of every principle of Lumen non-interference. They were archivists, not destroyers, but the archive was already burning. Orin the Vaxtorian core. "Can you overload it?" He transmitted on a tight, private comlink, hoping the null figures couldn't parse the focused signal. Orin glanced at the device, a sphere of swirling, imprisoned plasma. Even from across the room, they could feel its barely contained power. "Overload it, Kalen. The resulting explosion would vaporize this entire spire. It would destroy us. They erase things." Kalen sent back, his voice a low, urgent hum. "They control absence. Let's see how they handle an uncontrollable, chaotic presence. Give them too much data to process at once." It was a leap of faith into the unknown, an act of intellectual terrorism. Orin hesitated for only a fraction of a second. He looked at the holes multiplying in his shield, felt his own light fading, and made his choice. "Get down," he yelled, and with the last of his strength, he dropped the shield and fired a single, concentrated beam of his own energy at the Vaxtorian core. The beam of pure, hard light, the essence of a lumen's being, struck the containment field of the plasmasphere. For a moment, nothing happened. The null figures paused, their instruments still raised, their collective intelligence processing this new, unexpected action. Then, the sphere began to glow. A deep, angry red pulsed from its center. A high-pitched whine started to build, a sound of pure, unrestrained energy about to be born into a world that had forgotten what noise was. The null figures reacted. The beams of anti-light that had been aimed at the lumen now swung toward the overloading core. They tried to erase the energy, to smother the nascent explosion in its cradle with their weaponized void. But it was too late. They were masters of subtraction, but they were facing an equation of exponential runaway addition. The containment field shattered. The room was engulfed in a silent, blinding flash of pure, white plasma. Kalen felt a wave of unimaginable heat and force wash over him. And then, nothing. He awoke to a world of red. The emergency filters on his visor had slammed shut, tinting everything in a crimson glow. The air was thick with vaporized metal and crystal dust. The high-pitched whine of the ruptured core was gone, replaced by the groaning, tortured sound of the spire tearing itself apart. He pushed himself up. His suit was scorched, its energy reserves critical, but he was alive. The central chamber was a crater. The workbenches, the tools, the specimen in the stasis field, all were gone, vaporized. Of the null figures, there was no sign. They had either been annihilated in the blast or had retreated. He looked for Orin. He found him a few meters away, lying near the crumbling edge of the crater. The security officer's luminous form was dangerously dim, almost transparent. The focused blast at the core had taken nearly everything he had. Did it work? Orin chimed, his voice weak and flickering. Kalen scanned the chamber. The energy of the explosion was still radiating outwards, a chaotic, unstructured storm of radiation and heat. It was the antithesis of the planet's controlled silence. It was a scream of pure physics that could not be easily erased. For the first time since they had landed, his sensors were not blind. They were overwhelmed. "I think so," Kalen said, helping Orin to his feet. "We created a mess they can't clean up. Not quickly. Anyway." A deep, shuddering groan echoed through the spire. A massive crack raced up a nearby crystal wall. The entire structure was unstable. "We have to get out of here," Kalen urged. "Now." They stumbled through the ruins, back toward the entrance. The blast had blown the great black door off its hinges, twisting it into a misshapen wreck. They emerged into the valley. The sky was no longer a clear, dead gray. It was choked with a roiling cloud of black smoke pouring from the shattered top of the spire. The psychological illusions were gone. The false chasms, the ghost sounds, the phantom walls, the chaotic energy of the explosion had disrupted the planet's delicate control over its environment. For the first time, they were seeing the real Xylos, a dead, scarred world, ugly and brutal. The wall of nothingness that had blocked their retreat was also gone. Its perfect, clean edge shattered by the uncontrolled energy release. The path to the quiet quill was clear. Hope, a concept that had felt alien only moments before, flickered in Kalen's core. They had survived. They had fought back. He helped Orin limp toward their lander, their footsteps crunching on the dead dust. They were halfway across the valley when Kalen saw it. Standing on a ridge overlooking their path was a single null figure. It was not moving. It was not holding a weapon. It was just watching them. As they drew closer, Kalen realized this one was different. It was taller, and the black material of its suit seemed to flow and shift, as if it were made of liquid shadow. And in his mind, he felt a presence. It wasn't the cold, collective voice of the others. This was a single, focused consciousness, ancient and vast and utterly calm. It did not speak in words or concepts. It simply showed him an image in his mind's eye, the bone's spiral, but this time he saw how it was formed. He saw the Helians, not as victims of a stellar flare, but as a people who, facing the imminent death of their star, had turned their philosophical gaze inward. They had sought not to escape the fire, but to understand it, to embrace it, and to transcend it. They had concluded that life, existence, was a flaw, a temporary disruption in the perfect, eternal peace of non-being. And so, they had engineered their own extinction, not as an act of despair, but as their final, greatest work of art. They had built the silence. They had become the void. The figure on the ridge was not a descendant of the Helians. It was one of them, an original, an artist of the abyss. The mental image faded, and Kalen was left with a final, chilling realization. The explosion hadn't been a victory. It had been an interruption, a loud, messy, and ultimately insignificant distraction. They hadn't been fighting a colony or an intelligence agency. They had stumbled into a church and had desecrated its altar, and the figure on the ridge, the high priest of nothingness, was now looking down at them, not with anger, but with the patient, analytical gaze of a scholar who has just discovered a new and fascinatingly disruptive form of heresy. Their trial by combat was over. Their trial by faith was about to begin. The figure on the ridge didn't move, but its presence was a weight on the entire valley. It was the source, the epicenter of the silence, and the chaotic energy from their explosion was already beginning to recede around it, the storm of radiation calming into a placid, orderly gray. The smoke pouring from the shattered spire thinned, the tortured groans of the dying structure fading into the profound stillness that was this world's natural state. It was reasserting its control, smoothing the wrinkle they had violently punched into its perfect, blank sheet. Kalen felt a cold dread crystallize in his core. Their desperate act of defiance hadn't saved them. It had merely gotten them an audience. "We have to keep moving," he urged Orin, his voice a low, tight chime. The lander was a beacon of hope, a silver promise of escape on the horizon, but it felt a million miles away. Orin, leaning heavily on Kalen, could only nod. His light was a faint, guttering pulse, his energy almost completely spent. Every step was an agony. The null figure, the priest, as Kalen now thought of it, remained on the ridge, a silent adjudicator watching their pathetic crawl toward salvation. It made no move to intercept them. It didn't have to. The world itself was its weapon. The ground beneath their feet began to change. The firm, dusty soil softened, turning into a thick, viscous mud that clung to their boots, trying to drag them down. Kalen's suit registered the change not as geological, but informational. The planet wasn't physically altering the terrain. It was subtly editing the laws of physics in their immediate vicinity, increasing the force of friction and localized gravity. They were walking through a patch of space-time that had been rewritten to be difficult terrain. "It's toying with us," Orin gasped, stumbling as his legs sank into the grasping gray ooze. "Testing our perseverance, or studying our exhaustion," Kalen countered, straining to pull Orin forward. He looked up at the lander. It seemed no closer than before. A horrifying thought occurred to him. What if the space between them and the ship was also being edited, stretched like a rubber band, so that every step forward only took them halfway to their destination? They were trapped in a real-world version of Zeno's paradox, forever approaching but never arriving. The mental presence of the priest touched his mind again, gentle and inquisitive. It wasn't an attack, but a query. It showed him an image of a lumen star map, a vast, intricate web of glowing lines connecting thousands of worlds, the lumen archives, the sum total of their civilization's purpose. Then, it showed him a single, elegant tool, like a scribe's stylus, made of the same light-devouring black material. The stylus touched one of the glowing points of light on the map, and the point, along with the lines connecting to it, simply vanished. The message was clear, devoid of malice, presented as a simple statement of intent. Your map is too cluttered. It requires editing. We will bring it to its final, perfect state. This was their grand design, their sacred calling. They were not xenophobes or conquerors. They were cosmic editors. They believed the universe was a rough draft, a messy, chaotic story filled with unnecessary characters and pointless subplots. Their purpose was to revise it, to cut it down to its one true, essential element, the elegant, silent period at the end of the final page. Kalen felt a surge of defiance, a deep, instinctual revulsion against this philosophy of annihilation. The Lumen existed to remember. These beings existed to make everything forgotten. They were the antithesis of everything his people stood for. He pushed the intrusive thought from his mind and focused all his will, all his energy, on the physical act of moving forward. He poured his own luminous essence into his legs, fighting the unnatural gravity, dragging Orin step by agonizing step. The mud sucked at them. The air grew thick and heavy, but he refused to stop. He would not become a footnote in their revised edition of the cosmos. Seeing Kalen's renewed struggle, the priest on the ridge changed its tactics. The psychic pressure ceased. The manipulated gravity faded. The ground firmed up beneath their feet. For a moment, Kalen thought it had given up, that their display of will had somehow earned its respect. Then the ghosts appeared. They were not like the crude, data-driven illusions from before. These were perfect, tangible specters drawn from their own minds. Walking toward them from the direction of the lander was Phile. He was whole and unharmed, his luminous form bright and steady. He smiled, a gesture of pure, unadulterated relief. Kalen Orin. You made it. Lyra found a way to bypass their sensor net. She's beaming us up from here. The illusion was flawless. Kalen's own memory of Phail's voice, his mannerisms, his very essence, was being used against him. He knew it was a lie, but his heart, his emotional core, ached with the desire to believe it. Don't look. Kalen grunted to Orin, forcing his gaze down to the gray dust at his feet. It's not him. It's a memory. Orin let out a soft, mournful chime. He was too weak to even respond. The Phail ghost stopped a few feet in front of them, its smile unwavering. What's wrong? Don't you recognize me? We have to go. The ship is waiting. Its voice was a balm, a promise of safety and an end to their suffering. Kalen knew it was a trap, a more sophisticated version of the one that had claimed the real Phail. To engage with it, to even acknowledge it, would be to give the priest the data it needed to find the cracks in his psyche and break him apart. He pushed past the illusion, shouldering through the space where the phantom stood. There was no resistance, only a faint, cold sensation, like walking through a pocket of chilled air. Behind him, he heard the Phail ghost's voice change, its tone shifting from relief to a heartbreaking, pleading sorrow. Kalen, why are you leaving me behind? I thought we were a team. Don't you care? The words were darts dipped in his own conscience, aimed at his sense of loyalty and friendship. He gritted his teeth and kept moving. They were almost there. The silver hull of the quiet quill loomed before them, its entry ramp a welcoming slope of light. The outer hatch was open. Safety was 20 meters away. 10, 5. As they reached the base of the ramp, a new figure appeared at the top. It was Lyra, the senior archivist. Her form a cascade of calm, authoritative light. But something was wrong. Her light was tinged with gray, and her posture was rigid, unnatural. You have failed, the Lyra ghost projected, not with her familiar chiming voice, but with the cold, conceptual language of the priest. You have violated the core tenet. You brought chaos and destruction to a place of quiet contemplation. You are a flawed record. You must be expunged. This was not a lure, but a judgment. It was using the image of his superior, the embodiment of his life's purpose, to pronounce him a heretic. The real Lyra would be trying to save them, fighting to retrieve them. This puppet was telling him he was unworthy of retrieval. Kalen faltered, his steps slowing. The accusation struck at the very core of his identity. He had destroyed. He had violated his most sacred oath. The priest was using his own guilt as a weapon. At his side, Oren stirred. The security officer's light, which had been a bare flicker, suddenly blazed. A final defiant surge of energy. "It's not her," he managed, his voice raspy. He lifted his head and looked past the phantom Lyra, toward the empty sky. The stellograph. It would be in orbit. I can't see its light. It was a simple observation, a single piece of hard data that cut through the complex psychological warfare. Oren's mind, less concerned with philosophy and guilt, had seen the plain, physical truth of the illusion. The sky was empty. Their ship was not there. The realization broke the spell. Kalen looked at the Lyra ghost, and for the first time, he saw the subtle flaws in its construction, the slight unnaturalness of its posture, the deadness in its projected light. It was a perfect copy, but it was still just a copy. "Get on the ship," Oren said, giving Kalen a shove that almost sent them both tumbling. "On the door, go. I'm not leaving you." Kalen protested. "I can't pilot it alone. And you." Oren's form was already fading, the last of his energy spent in that final blaze of clarity. "My light is gone. Kalen, I would only be dead weight." He looked back, toward the ridge where the priest stood, a silent silhouette against the gray sky. "But I can still cast a shadow." Before Kalen could react, Oren turned away from the ship and began to walk back into the valley, his steps unsteady but resolute. His fading form was a beacon of defiance. He was drawing the enemy's attention, a final act of sacrifice to buy Kalen the seconds he needed. The priest. Its attention momentarily diverted by this unexpected act of self-negation, focused on the dying lumen. The Lyra ghost at the top of the ramp flickered and vanished. Kalen didn't waste the opportunity. He scrambled up the ramp, dragging himself into the lander's cockpit. He slammed his hand on the control panel. "Hatch, seal and launch emergency protocol." The ramp retracted. The outer door hissed shut, sealing him inside the sterile, quiet sanctuary of the quiet quill. Through the forward viewport, He saw Orin fall to his knees in the center of the valley. The priest descended from the ridge, moving with an unnerving ace of fluid speed. It stopped before Orin, its tall, shadowy form looming over the fading spark of the lumen. It raised one of its hands. Kalen averted his gaze, his core twisting with grief and rage. The lander's engines whined, the sound a beautiful, defiant scream against the planet's silence. The ship shuddered, lifted off the ground, and began to climb. As he broke through the thin, rust-colored clouds, he dared to look at his sensors. The planet of Xylos was shrinking below him, and on his life sign monitor, the single faint indicator that had been Orin winked out, replaced by the same perfect, absolute blank that had swallowed fail. He was alone. He had escaped. But as he looked out at the vast, star-dusted tapestry of the galaxy, the priest's final message echoed in his mind. The archive is incomplete. He had escaped the killing jar, but he was now a carrier of its philosophy. He had seen the final page, and he knew, with a certainty that chilled him to his very essence, that the editors were coming for the rest of the book. And his flight was not an escape. It was merely the turning of a page. The journey back was a new form of torment. The quiet quill, once a vessel of serene exploration, had become a coffin adrift in a sea of stars. Kalen was alone with ghosts. The empty seats of Fail and Orin were voids in the small cockpit, holes in the fabric of his reality that his mind kept trying and failing to patch over. He ran constant, looping diagnostics, not on the ship, but on the space around it. He was hunting for silence. He scanned for the telltale signature of a data-consuming void, terrified that a piece of Xylos had clung to his hull, a creeping infection of nothingness that would follow him home. He found nothing but the normal, gentle hum of the cosmos. Yet the absence of the anomaly was almost as unnerving as its presence had been. It was a silence that felt temporary, a predator holding its breath. He dedicated the long, silent hours to his work, but his purpose had been twisted. He was no longer a passive archivist. He was assembling a case for the prosecution. He collated every scrap of corrupted data from the Weaver, every paradoxical sensor reading from the planet's surface, every microsecond of the life sign monitors of his crew before they winked out of existence. He transcribed his memory of the priest's telepathic sermon, translating its cold, conceptual language into the precise, mathematical syntax of the lumen. He was creating a new entry for the archives, a record of a species whose sole cultural output was the act of deletion. He named them the Erasers. When the stellograph finally appeared on his view screen, a familiar, elegant ship of spun light. It felt like a dream from another lifetime. He docked the scarred and scorched lander with automated precision, his movements numb and detached, when he stepped into the pristine, brightly lit corridor of the mothership. The contrast was a physical shock. Here, information flowed freely. The air hummed with the soft chime of data streams and the calm, logical discourse of his people. It was a world of absolute order, and he had returned to it as an emissary of chaos. Lyra met him in the debriefing chamber. Her luminous form was a steady, calming presence, but Kalen could see the subtle flickers of concern in her light as she took in his appearance. His own form was dim, his energy core depleted, and his light carried a frantic, agitated rhythm that was alien to their culture. He did not offer the customary greetings or salutations. He simply activated the holo projector and began his report. He showed her everything. the valley of scarred crystal, the circle of null figures, the desecrated observatory, and the vivisected lumen specimen. He played the final, empty log of Fail's life signs, a stretch of perfect, dataless time that was a wound in the ship's memory banks. He described the conceptual voice, the philosophy of erasure, and the final, terrible revelation of the Heliant's self-engineered ascension into nothingness. He concluded with Orin's sacrifice and the silent, judging gaze of the priest. When he finished, the chamber was silent. Lyra did not move for a long time. Her mind, like all lumen, was a vast repository of facts and established theories. What Kalen described did not fit into any known category of existence. It was a logical contradiction, a philosophical poison. Erasure, she finally chimed, the word itself sounding alien in their language. You are proposing a civilization whose fundamental principle is the negation of principle. It is a paradox. It is a truth, Kalen responded, his voice raw. They are not paradoxical. They are simply the final answer to an equation we never thought to ask. What is the ultimate state of the universe? We believed it was a state of perfect preservation, an infinite library. They believe it is a perfect blank page. Lyra brought his findings before the remote expedition lead, a council of senior archivists from the Lumen Core worlds. Kalen was present as a witness, a ghost at his own trial. He listened as his report was dissected, analyzed, and ultimately doubted. The council, beings who had spent millennia in peaceful, intellectual pursuits, could not conceive of such an enemy. The crew's loss is a tragedy, one of the council members projected, its voice a dry, ancient chime. But the data is inconclusive. A unique energy field could have caused the sensor failures. The psychological pressure you describe is a known symptom of deep field data deprivation. They are not a military threat, another argued. They are a philosophical one. The proper response is to send a new team, a delegation of our finest metaphysicists, to open a dialogue. They didn't understand. They were trying to debate a tidal wave, to reason with an earthquake. They saw an intellectual puzzle where Kalen had seen the face of the abyss. He felt a surge of desperate frustration. He had brought them a warning of the end of all things, and they were scheduling a committee meeting. You are wrong, Kalen interrupted. A breach of protocol so severe it caused a wave of disturbed light to ripple through the chamber. You cannot debate them, because their argument is the silence that follows the debate. You cannot study them, because to be known by them is to be targeted for erasure. You think they are contained on one dead world at the edge of the void. You are mistaken. Xylos was not their home. It was a statement of purpose. It was the first page of their new and final edition of the cosmos. His outburst was met with a stunned, disapproving silence. He had failed. They would send more scholars, more weavers, more lambs to the silent slaughter, and they would not understand the truth until their own worlds began to go dark. He felt the weight of his failure settle upon him, heavier than any manipulated gravity. It was in that moment of despair that the alert came. It cut through the council's session with a priority so high it could not be ignored. It was a single, repeating signal from the Galactic Center monitoring station, an automated deep space post whose sole function was to listen. It was humanity's SETI program, but on a cosmic scale, A silent ear turned to the symphony of the universe. The message was not a warning of an approaching fleet or a supernova. It was a single, terrifying character of lumen code, repeated over and over, a null symbol, a 0. Lyra's form flared as she brought up the live galactic chart on the main screen. A collective gasp, a silent pulse of shock, went through the council. A tiny, insignificant point of light on the map, the monitoring station was gone. In its place was a new, growing patch of perfect, data-consuming blackness. It was thousands of light years from Xylos, a completely unrelated sector. There was no connection, except one. The station's purpose had been to know, to listen, to record. The stylus had touched another point on the map. The debate was over. The skepticism vanished, replaced by a cold, dawning horror that dwarfed anything Kalen had felt in the valley. He had not been a traumatized survivor. He had been a prophet. Lyra turned her gaze to Kalen, and in her light, he saw that the ancient, placid calm of his people was gone forever. It had been replaced by something new, something hard and sharp and utterly necessary. Your designation has been changed, Kalen, she chimed, her voice no longer the soft melody of a scholar, but the clear, resonant tone of a commander. You are no longer an archivist of what was. You are now the first sentinel of what is to come. Kalen looked at the grand map of the galaxy, the beautiful, intricate web of light and life that he had dedicated his life to preserving. He was no longer seeing it as a library of stories to be cherished. He was seeing it as a dwindling collection of candles in a gathering. Silent wind. His mission was no longer to remember the past. It was to fight for the future's right to exist. The Lumen's long, peaceful era of knowing was over. A new, terrible age of believing and fighting for that belief had just begun.